So welcome everyone to our, which one is it now? The fifth Mini Science 2018 lecture. You know our series is called Women in Science at McGill and Beyond, and you also know this series is made possible through the generous support of Dr. Lauren Trottier. McGill University is located on land which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst Indigenous peoples, including the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe nations. McGill honors, recognizes, and respects these nations as the traditional stewards of the lands and waters on which we meet today. At the end of this series, you will be able to view the archived webcasts. That is why John is here from McGill Communications. He is taping the entire presentation, and at the very end, they will compile them. They will be platformed as webcasts. In order to make this an effective and useful webcast, please do not ask questions during the presentation by Brigitte. There will be a Q&A afterwards, and we will, I'm not quite sure how we'll do it. We'll use some sort of handheld mic in the audience or something like that. Please turn off any devices that might disturb the speaker. There might be a brief interruption. Well, I'm guaranteeing every single night around 7 o'clock, the intercom says, it's very muted, but it does come on. You'll hear it. It's from the reference desk. It says the library's reference desk is now closing. Please check out anything you need. And we can't do anything about it. We just ignore it, and we'll continue to do so. Please don't forget to go online for background readings that are available as links on our website. So you just Google in Mini Science 2018 McGill and you'll find it. All the speakers in this series have provided us with introductions to their work as scientists, and these background readings accent and enhance certain aspects of what you hear at the presentations. Special thanks tonight to all our volunteers. We have volunteers from the Red Path Museum Society, that's a student club, and the on-site volunteers are the people who work in the Rare Books Room. Our moderator tonight is Elizabeth Patitsas. Elizabeth started in January 2018. This is the first thing she has ever moderated at McGill. She is an assistant professor, special category, Department of Integrated Studies in Education, and assistant professor, School of Computer Science. Cross appointment. 50-50 between Faculty of Education and the School of Computer Science. I think you may be the only one.
Yep, I'm the only one.
She is accepting graduate students and can advise students from both departments. I recommend that you go to her website to check out her recent publications because they give you a good idea of her research work. Her area of focus seems to me to be the sociology of computer science education. Computer science education, also known as computing education, is the study of the teaching and learning of computer science, such as algorithms, programming, computer logic. She is also interested in the policy issues surrounding access to CS, that's computer science education. Her PhD was in computer science at the University of Toronto. Elizabeth will now introduce our speaker, Brigitte.
Well, this is embarrassing because now my bio is going to be longer than what I'm actually introducing for our speaker. Because all of you have in front of you a wonderful bio of Brigitte. So I thought I would just give a few words to let you know that she is a wonderful and amazing professor, as you can imagine. And today she's going to be talking to you about women in computer science. So this is probably going to have an obvious answer, but what is the only STEM field where the percentage of women has gone down with time? Computer science!
That's right.
Yay! So Brigitte is going to be speaking about that, the history, why we need more women in computer science, multiple arguments for why we need more women in computer science, and what is going on here at McGill to try and improve female representation in computer science. And without further ado, Brigitte is going to speak to us.
Thanks for having me. I'm very excited to be part of this mini-series in science, and thanks for the nice introductions. So I wanted to share with you some viewpoints on gender and the gender gap in computer science. So we'll look at different angles of what the gender gap is, why it matters, why we want to change it, and what happens here sort of at McGill. You might wonder, why there's a beluga whale on this slide, since I'm not a biologist, but actually the beluga whale and this logo is a logo of the programming language we're developing here at McGill. So it is a logo of we're exploring sort of the ideas what the next generation of programming languages could be, and that's sort of the language we're working on. But before I talk about the gender gap, I wanted to tell you a little bit more about myself. I've been interested in the gender gap probably the first day when I walked into a classroom in computer science, which is when I started my undergrad studies in Darmstadt in Germany. And there were about 450 students in that classroom, and you could probably count the women in one hand. So there were 5. So that kind of got me really to think, why are there so few women? I was maybe a bit naive when I started computer science and didn't think about this that much. I got involved in various kinds of outreach efforts. After my degree, I went as a visiting researcher to McGill University with a fellowship events. But I also, during that time, I attended the largest gathering of women in computer science that happened in the United States, which was called the Grace Hopper Celebration. It was just founded in some way, and I was one of the only people from Europe who got a travel scholarship to attend, so I was very excited. Back then, there were about 2,000 women and other people attending Grace Hopper. Today, it's about 15,000. Okay. I then started my PhD at Carnegie Mellon. I chose Carnegie Mellon, yes, because it was one of the top schools in computer science, and it had one of the top research groups in my area, but it also was on my radar because they had managed to increase the participation of women in the undergraduate program from 9% to 40% back at that time. And during my time as a PhD student, together with 4 other PhD students, we founded an organization called Women at SES, Women in the School of Computer Science, which still exists there today. And we were very lucky to have a mentor, Lenore Blum, who joined Carnegie Mellon at that time as a full professor, and she'd been involved in women in mathematics for a long time before, and she was a strong advocate for women in computer science, and she also provided various kinds of financial resources, so we, as PhD students, could actually provide some of the networking activities, professional development, mentoring to other younger students, and also the undergraduate students got really involved, and this organization still exists. There's actually one full-time faculty member who runs this organization today at Carnegie Mellon and has expanded to computer science for all. And since 2003, I'm here at McGill. I work primarily in programming languages, as I mentioned, and I teach a class called 302, which had in fall 270 students. It's a required course, which is a lot of fun to teach. But I'm also the co-chair of the undergraduate and academic committee at the moment. And I've been the chair of a committee called Women in the School of Computer Science for the past years. It's a similar group as the one here, but it's a bit smaller on scale. So what is the gender gap? Okay, so when we talk about the gender gap in computer science, we typically refer to the low participation rate of women in computer science in particular. So in 2016, that's the latest data we have. We have 17.9% of undergraduate computer science bachelor's degrees are awarded to women. And this might seem very surprising because computer science affects every aspect of our lives, right? So you might have already opened Facebook today, you might have done some online banking, you might have filed your taxes, maybe, or if you haven't filed your taxes, you might still do this later on this month. So it really impacts every aspect. You might watch movies over Netflix, right? You might read your news online. So it is really touching every aspect of the economy and the culture. And there has been explosive growth in the job market. Now, it's not just actually it is more a diversity gap. In the US, we have only 7.5% of Hispanics have a degree awarded to them. 3.1% are Black and African American, and less than 0.5% are First Nation, American Indian, and Alaska Natives. So it tells you that there's only a very particular group, in some sense, of studying computer science. Okay. So in fact, this hasn't always been the case. So I want to take you a little bit back to the history, the beginnings of computer science. Okay. So computer science started out in the 1930s, 1940s, where the first computers were built. And in fact, there was a strong recruitment of women who were typically math majors, into the field. Partly it was a necessity because of the war. There were a lot of men in the war, so there were not enough people whom they could hire. And this is a particular picture of the ENIAC project, which was one of the first digital computers developed at the University of Pennsylvania. In fact, back in the 1930s and 1940s, the people who programmed these machines were called computers, okay, before we actually had machines, which we called computers. In the 1950s, I mentioned Grace Hopper as a Grace Hopper celebration, and I want to mention her here as well. She had a math PhD. She was then a math professor at Vassar College before she joined the Navy, and was also involved in various kinds of computing projects during the war. The focus really of these projects was, for example, to calculate the trajectory of bombs, for example, right? So it was a lot of arithmetical calculations that needed to be done. But after the war, people thought that there was a really untapped power in the computing world, that they could apply it to businesses. And that was really an enormous insight, because before computers, we thought that computers could do very well arithmetic, but we didn't really foresee the potential computers could have. And the language she developed was COBOL. It's still actually very much present in everyday life. There's a lot of legacy code out there written in COBOL. And going to the 1960s, I want to mention Margaret Hamilton. She was the lead software developer of the Apollo mission to the moon. She also coined the word software engineering, which you probably hear today quite often. And she was a director at the MIT for software engineering. So women had been present, right? Have been driving the technology back then. And then by this end of the 1960s, the first computer science departments were founded, among them also the School of Computer Science here at McGill. And as Elizabeth said, what happened to computer science? Okay, so this is where computer science started. And it was, at that time sort of on par as some of the other sciences, physical science, law, and medical school. And there was a strong rise as women enrolled in these programs. In fact, you see here at medical school and the law school is a strong rise, and computer science keeps up. But then in 1984, right, you see a continuous drop, and this drop continues today. So I'm not going to talk too much about why this happened. There were various events. Certainly the event of personal computers which entered homes was a big factor in this. Maybe what we think a computer scientist is supposed to look like is certainly another. But I want to focus sort of more on today, okay, and where we're going. So why should we bridge the gender gap? Okay, you might say, well, okay, this happened. Why do we care? And I want to really emphasize that this is an important aspect. Everybody should care. So the first thing is that computer science is really a foundational science today, right? It is as important as knowing something about biology, photosynthesis, the digestive system, if you like, okay, electricity, because it plays such an important role in our daily lives. And so I think every child should have the chance to learn what an algorithm is, how algorithms work, how programs work, how the internet works, how an app works, okay? Because then that means they can shape the society and they can shape the world they live in. But also, I think it's important to understand that it is actually a really good job. Okay, so computer science majors can earn 40% more than the college average. So it is really a gateway to a very good career, which provides a very good basis for living. It's also the right thing to do because 71% of all new jobs in STEM are in computing, while we are only producing at the moment 8% of the STEM graduates in computer science. Just make a little break.
Yeah.
Okay. So in some sense, you might say, really, the STEM problem is a computer science problem. Okay? And one thing I find sort of surprising is that although, right, computer science plays such a large role when we talk about STEM when it comes to jobs, it's not reflected in the name STEM, right? STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. While in Europe, actually, it's called MINT, which is called mathematics, informatics, which is just a different term for computer science, natural science, and technology, okay? And so I think it's not even the importance of computer science is not even reflected in the acronym we use to describe these disciplines. Now, it's also, I want to drive home this point because here is the statistics from the US Labor Department. And you see that by 2022, it's 74% of the jobs in computing will be, of STEM jobs will be in computing. And it will be a whole variety of aspects within the computer science field. So it will be software development, system analysis, security. It will be touching all aspects, essentially. Now, it also makes sense, of course, for companies for that reason, okay, to be interested in diversity because the world simply needs more coders. The job growth is essentially by 2020, they project that it is 1 million more jobs than students out there. So, of course, companies want more coders, okay? So that means we need to tap into an untapped potential in some sense, right? And since we have 50% women on campus studying, one of the potential is certainly women. It also makes sense economically because for another reason. So there was an important report by McKinsey on diversity matters. And they looked at companies, how they perform. And in particular, they looked at what is the likelihood that companies in the top quartile for diversity financially outperform those in the bottom quartile. And they observed that gender diverse companies are 15% more likely to outperform those in the bottom quartile. And they are ethnically diverse companies are more likely to outperform them by 35%. Okay? So there's a strong economic incentive from companies to diversify their workforce. And so I think diversity matters, okay, and I particularly like this quote from Justin Trudeau: diversity is really the engine of invention, and it generates creativity, and it enriches the world, and it enriches the technology we're producing. So in the second part of my talk, I want to talk a bit more about some of the things you might have read in the news, okay, or you might be reading in the news about, in some sense, failures of technology, where you might say, you know, diversity really matters because we are working with this technology in every day. So the first one is about image recognition, okay. So anybody has used Google Photos? Some of you, okay. Okay, so yes, okay, so Google Photos is you take a picture with your phone, okay, and it will group your pictures together in certain albums, your grandkids in one, your dogs and cats in another, okay. And so this is the story of an African American, Jackie Alcini, in 2015. He took a bunch of photos of friends at a concert and he loaded them into Google Photos. And Google Photos stores and automatically organizes these images. So it groups these pictures together, and he was surprised by how the program labeled his friends. Okay, so what do you think happened? Okay, well, okay, sorry?
Monkeys?
Exactly, okay, so the Google image recognition algorithm auto-tagged these pictures as gorillas, okay? Flickr did the same thing as apes, okay? And so you might say, you know, are these algorithms racist, right? It's also terrible, actually, in identifying Asians. So, okay, you know, this seems to be a real problem. Now, I should also mention, okay, it's also terrible in other things. So among them, for example, it would label pictures of the concentration camps in Germany as gyms. Okay? So it clearly has a problem, okay? So what is the problem? Well, actually, the problem is that while if you use these programs, they're statistically really impressive. I mean, they work amazingly well on many examples, but they're individually really quite unreliable. So I put up a couple of things, okay? So for example, it would say, what's my favorite one? Well, it will say to this guy, here, okay, it will say it's a strawberries. Okay, well, I mean, you could see why it would think that it is strawberries, okay? It will say that, I don't know why it would come up with an African chameleon for this one. I don't know, okay? It has, you know, it has here, it says it's a green snake, okay, maybe, but, you know, it will say for the stripes, with the yellow, black stripes, it will say school bus, okay? Well, yes, school buses are yellow and black, okay? So, so they don't work very well on all the examples, okay? We can't expect them at the moment to work correct on all the examples. And in fact, they can be easily manipulated. So this is a slide from DARPA, the Department of Defense. And here you see an image of the panda on the left. And just by inserting a little bit of noise, less than 1% of distortion, it will say with the equal high confidence that it is actually seeing a gibbon. And there are even more glaring examples where things fail. So these flaws can be actually exploited. Okay, so the second example, so what was the fix? Okay, that's actually an interesting aspect. Okay, so what was the fix? Well, it was a very simple fix, okay, namely that essentially the software didn't label any images anymore of gorilla, chimpanzee, and monkeys, okay? Okay, so that's definitely a technological failure, okay? So the second example I want to mention, some of you might have seen, was a Microsoft chatbot, which was released in 2016. The chatbot was named Tay, and it was supposed to be an experiment in conversational understanding, how it reacted with other tweets which were out there, and it was supposed to learn to engage with people through casual and playful conversation. And within 24 hours, Tay was tweeting very offensive tweets. I'm not going to show any of them because they're very, very offensive. And it had to be shut down within 24 hours. Okay. So what happened? So other users interacted with the bot, okay, and it in some sense reacted and repeated what other users said. But it also is the case that offensive content is somewhat more popular online. So it will get a higher ranking if it's shared or liked more. Okay? It will show up higher in your Facebook feed, for example. And the same thing happens, of course, with tweets. So bots are in some sense trained to maximize the attention they're getting. And so it can be quite easily manipulated in that regard. And yes, Microsoft claimed that these chatbots were cleaned and filtered, but apparently this didn't work so well. They have a new one, it works much better. Okay, so there is a learning curve. So the third example I want to mention is language translation. Anybody has used language translation online? Yeah? Google Translate? Yeah, super. It's a super great program. I love it, okay? In many ways, you know, it saves my day sometimes. But actually, you know, there are many languages which are actually gender neutral. Okay? So it's worthwhile thinking a little bit how these translation programs work. Now, I don't speak any Turkish, I should say that, okay? But what happens in Turkish is that he, she, or it is all translated to the letter O, okay? Now, I produced these, and you might say, how did she produce this? She didn't speak any Turkish. Well, it's quite easy. You type in, she's an engineer, and you say, translate to Turkish, and you get what is here, okay? And then you flip it around and say, translate this back to me, and it will tell you, he's an engineer, okay? And you can type in, he's a nurse, and it will translate it to Turkish, and then you flip it around and say, translate it back to me, and it will say, she's a nurse, okay? You can do this also with things like, she is smart. You translate it to Turkish, and you say, translate it back to me, and it will say, he is smart, okay? So why would it do that? Okay, why would it have this obvious bias that it thinks, right, that engineers are male and people who are smart are apparently also male, and you know, women are sort of nurses and teachers? And the reason is that statistically speaking, we are using more often the male pronoun when talking about engineering and the female pronoun when we're referring to nurses. So if we use a statistical model, then this amplifies and reinforces our existing biases, right? It reflects back to us what is present. And this is not only happening, of course, with Turkish to English. There are actually quite a few languages which are gender neutral. So Hungarian, Finnish, there's also Japanese is in some sense also gender neutral, that you have to have the context to identify the gender of some of the people you're talking about. So the two problems I see is really that one of the biggest problems is that the biases that exist are amplified by the underlying technology, by the statistical models we use. And I particularly like this quote by Adam Kalai, who's a researcher at Microsoft, where he says, even the most unbiased algorithm is going to flag up the biases of a slanted culture. If you don't take steps to remove it, you should assume prejudice is well represented in all your software. Worse, if you don't get rid of it, the glossy appearance of impartiality conferred by search engines and algorithms could actually amplify our subtle biases. Okay. So the failures we see are really largely a result of the cultural and environmental conditions we live in. And the problem in some sense is that the biases, they existed before, but they didn't affect us as much. Now everybody is using Google Translate. Okay, everybody is using search for images. Okay, many people are using Google Photos. So the problem is becoming bigger because software applications are shared worldwide, right? And it's the same application we're sharing. It's used worldwide and it becomes part of our daily lives. So we have to face it in everyday lives, right? And we have no way directly to influence it in some way. Now, the second problem is what I would call lazy bias. Okay, there's no real interest in fixing the problem. So, I mean, I mentioned to you the fix for the image recognition algorithm, right? And that's a very simple fix. It's not very expensive for companies to do that fix, but it's not a really good fix. And partly the problem is that this is a hard problem. I mean, there's a reason why the military, like DARPA, is interested in coming up with better image recognition algorithms, because it could lead to a real problem if the image recognition algorithm is wrong. But there are no regulations for companies to fix it. It's expensive and it's actually really hard. Okay. And in some sense, developers are under pressure and they're lazy. Okay, they don't get anything out. These programs are for free. Okay, we don't pay anything for them. So it is, in some sense, developers are just trying to crush out some code on the deadline. They don't think about the wider consequences of their actions. And the tech industry slaps the stuff together in the expectation that social implications will take care of themselves in some way. So I want to also talk in the last part of my talk a bit more about the gender gap here at McGill and how we have managed to some extent overcome it. Okay. So this is very small, so I'm going to say some of the data which is on this slide. So this is the enrollment in computer science at McGill. So CS stands always for computer science. So this starts in 1995, where we had 356 majors and minors in computer science. And you see the enrollment goes up. Around 2000, we hit 680. And then it goes down, okay, to the low point, 199 in 2007. So sort of this is largely due, every department in North America and in Europe experienced this. This is largely due to that the dot-com bubble kind of burst, and there was a decline in interest in computer science, and there's a rapid increase here. So we are now at 1,499 students enrolled in computer science here at McGill. There was a 20% increase just over the last year. Okay. So this is an enormous challenge, okay, and it will continue to go up. Now, we have 560 female students enrolled in our programs, and I'm happy to say that the percentage of women majoring in computer science has also increased. Okay, so we started here in 2013 at around 20%, and it has gone up to almost 35%. And so I want you to contrast this to the 17.9% we have in North America graduating with a computer science degree. Okay. And in fact, this is one of the largest enrollment of women in computer science in Canada. So where do they major? Okay, so we have a number of different majors in our program. Among them, the computer science bio major is one of the most popular ones, which is this purple line here. It has over 50% women enrolled. But in fact, here, this is the computer science and math major, okay? So it's not that women are always interested in combining it with like, you know, some more softer science, I don't know. No, right? They pick the hard stuff, okay? It's actually one of our hardest majors, computer science, math, okay? And this line here is the math computer science honors program, which also has increased, okay? This here is CS majors. It's also slowly going up. Software engineering majors is going up. And this is sort of a line I would like to change. This is the honors program in computer science, which sits below 20%. Okay. Now, one of the reasons, you know, this changed, I mean, certainly, you know, enrollment changed all across North America, but I think one of the reasons why we have such a diverse group of women also in our programs is for 3 reasons, okay? One of the things we started back in 2007 when we had this low point was to open computer science to people who did not have necessarily the science prerequisites from CEGEPs, for example. So you were able to study, and you are now able to study computer science in the Faculty of Arts. Okay? By combining a computer science major concentration with a supplemental minor, you get exactly the same, more or less the same credits as a major in computer science. Okay? And indeed, more women study it through arts than through science. We also have a number of double majors, like the biology one. We also have statistics and computer science, which has been enormously popular among a diverse group of people. So I want to share with you some results of a survey we did back in 2015. It was with 2 students, Elizabeth Sulmont and Li Shui. So I was running this survey among the undergraduate students here at McGill. And we were interested in, you know, validating some of the gut feelings we had, okay, where the women came from in our programs. We had 171 responses. 100 identified themselves as male and 63 as female, and the remaining didn't want to share or didn't identify either as male or female. The responses were well distributed, in fact, okay? So we had over 37% were in U3, over 27% were in U2. So it gave us a good group which had some perspective in the program, right? So that was also a nice thing, and it was important for us. So one of the first things we asked them was, you know, what year did you declare your major in computer science? And there was a strong gender difference, I would say. So this is before arriving at McGill. So 51% of our male students knew before arriving at McGill that they wanted to major in computer science. Okay. Only 23.8% of the women knew sort of beforehand that they wanted to major in computer science. By U0, 26.3% declared it during the very, very first year. So if you were outside of the province, you're a U0 student. That's when 20.6% of the women declared computer science as a major. And most of them, 34, almost 35%, declared it in U1. Also a substantial size still among the men, but certainly quite high among the women. And even here in U2, there were still had almost 20% transferring into computer science. Okay. So women do not start out as computer science majors. Okay. They discover that computer science is something they want to do. So where does their interest come from? Okay. In fact, the course you take, if you don't know anything about computer science and you just want to, you know, wet your feet and want to learn something about it, you take a course called Comp 202, which Julia is teaching, who's sitting here. And we get 85% of our women in our program have taken exactly this course. Okay. Also 63% of the men, but essentially almost every female student. Okay. So that is a very important gateway course to take. And if we look at motivations, we see also a very nice distribution. So we asked them for the top 3 factors that led you to pursue a computer science program. So for men, it's childhood interests, okay, which is this bar, aptitude for the subject, as well as job prospects. Now for the women, it's a bit different. Okay, aptitude for the subject factors in job prospects, but the top one is actually a course at McGill. Okay, so it's something, you know, you can change this. Okay, we can change this. So 202 is a course that has no prerequisites. It's offered fall and winter. It has 46% women students enrolled. As I mentioned, 85% of our current computer science majors, women, have taken this course. And to give you a sense of how big this course is and how much work it is to manage, okay, it's 895 students have taken this course in fall. Okay. And I mean, we don't advertise this course anymore. Okay, it's the interest in this course comes really from the students, right? The students know it is something they need to learn. So we also asked them, how does the interest in computer science develop over time? So we asked them, how would you rate your interest in the program at the start of the program? And you see here, the men, they said at the beginning they were very excited. The women are a bit more, reserved. They didn't know exactly what they were getting into, so they were a little bit more reserved about the whole thing. But the interesting aspect is, how would you rate your interest now in your program? Okay, and the interesting thing is that now the women felt actually stronger about computer science than the men. Okay, so the men, I guess, had a bit of a reality check, okay, so to speak, on if it was really matching their expectation or not. Okay, but the women actually realized that it is something really interesting which speaks to them. Okay, and there was still a very strong interest here among in this category. And the last point I want to share with you is the support and confidence are really key. So we asked them, have you ever considered transferring out of the program? And you see that here, this is the bar for the women. And over 30% have thought of transferring out because they were discouraged by the difficulty of the program. Okay? And that is, of course, clear because the women started later in computer science, right? They transferred in later. So that means they had to do some catching up to do. And that, of course, is hard. Okay? So, and they also mentioned the lack of support, right? And that is, of course, also the case. If you have to catch up, you rely more on teaching assistants, professors being available, other resources to actually be able to catch up and get some practical experience, right? But you see, it's not because they became interested in another program. Okay? Indeed, the men transferred or thought of transferring because they realized computer science wasn't the thing they really wanted to do. So I want to talk about the community because that's really another very important aspect of bringing people into computer science, I think, okay, and keeping the people in computer science. So, of course, one aspect are the professors, right? People who teach, like Julia 202, or other courses. So individual professors make certainly a huge difference in micro-mentoring, office hours, engagement of students, supervising undergraduate research projects, and so on. The undergraduate and academic committee has monitored the enrollment. It also really closely tries to collaborate with CSUS, which is the Computer Science Undergraduate Society. We aim to participate in their events, and we organize various kinds of outreach efforts we were involved in. We do mentoring and advising, and so this is the whole package we're trying to deal with. And the women in the School of Computer Science Committee really closely collaborates with McGill, which is the student-run organization for women in computer science. We participate in coffee mornings. I was in charge of a joint fundraiser to send students to the Grace Hopper celebration because it was shown that people who attended the Grace Hopper celebration, it really gave them a boost in their programs to continue and push through and then become really a successful student in computer science. So we did a fundraiser for that with the GoFundMe campaign, and we were able to send several students to Grace Hopper. But I think the most important part, actually, is not the professors. It's actually the students. So The first part is the Computer Science Undergraduate Society, and I learned that they were actually named Department of the Year from the Science Undergraduate Society. They have a very strong representation of women on the council. In fact, a few years ago, there were only women on the council, okay, in leadership positions. So that was amazing. They also have something called the Equity, which is a weekly tea time for students in computer science to discuss equity issues in computer science. McGill has taken on a very strong and high-profile role, also interfacing with many companies locally here, because companies are interested in hiring a diverse workforce. So they've, for example, also organized the McGill Hackathon to get people more experience in building software applications and software projects in general. They participated in Grace Hopper and the Canadian Celebration for Women in Computing. They organize these coffee mornings, partly with profs, partly with tech companies. They've started a peer mentoring system they call Sisters, where students can pair up with another upper-level classmate, but also with mentors in industry. So I think this has made a huge difference. I think both combined has made a huge difference for the students, especially as our enrollments grow. I also want to mention the AI Summer Camp for the Social Good, which happened last year, and I think it will happen again this year. It's an initiative from some students who work in the AI lab to sort of think about how they can design or use AI and machine learning techniques for creating sort of a better world, I guess. So let me wrap up, okay? So when we talk about the gender and diversity gap in computer science, I think it's worthwhile keeping in mind that it is not a lack of ability, okay? It's not a lack even of interest, I think. People don't know very much, I think, in some sense, what computer scientists do. And it's largely a result of cultural and environmental conditions. It's reflected in the technology we use, okay? It has all the deficiencies we see in our cultural and environment we're living in. But it's also important to realize that we can overcome it, and it should be overcome, right? I mean, everybody should be able to shape such an important technology, understand some parts of this technology, so they can participate in the discussion, right, of how the society should look like in the future. So, and I think in the end, it makes the technology better, okay? So, but this requires really commitment. It requires commitment from individuals, okay, departments, universities. It requires commitments from companies. But I think one aspect which is often kind of neglected is that it really requires financial resources. Okay? It's great that students drive these activities, right? I completely admire them, but students come and go. Okay? So if one wants to change something, it needs to be supported by an organization in the forms of sustained support, okay? Because otherwise, it'll go, right? With the activists behind it, it will go, and then we don't have a sustained impact. So I think that is sort of worthwhile in mind. It's something we need to pay attention to. Thank you.
If there are any questions for Brigitte?
Yep. Thank you for that talk. I'm a biologist, and I really appreciate that I could see much more. Sorry, we're just looking around
No.
the microphone now.
What are we going to do, John? Just keep going?
Okay.
Yeah. I can repeat the question.
Okay. So yeah, I wish I had more computer science knowledge. So I guess I was wondering if there was a movement so we have basic science courses that you have to take in zeros, biology, physics, and chemistry. Is there a movement to make computer science a requirement? Because I didn't even think. Maybe, I hope now people coming in will think about it, but.
Right, so this is a very interesting question. It's also a very political question, because if we take out one of the required courses, then which one should go, okay? And in fact, the fact that we actually have 202 as one of the options you can take in U0 was a huge battle, and it was an achievement. So that wasn't always the case. So I think it happened actually in 2008, okay, where several departments in the Faculty of Science fought for that students have a little bit of choice in what kind of courses they can take, because before it was very fixed. Okay, it was very fixed: biology, chemistry, the sciences you mentioned, and at the moment we have it as an optional course. I would love to see it as a required course. I think many students are taking it, but that's a battle that needs to be fought.
Especially because you need it. Like, I recognize how valuable it would be to have some skills in that in every field.
There are a handful of universities now that do make everyone take it, like Carnegie Mellon College in the United States, and they now have 40% women in their computer science program. Yes. Any other questions?
Why was it such a battle? What was the
Do we want to turn
I don't know. Maybe that is not something I should say on camera.
But I'm happy
You
to chat
don't
with
have
you
it,
after.
but we'll repeat your question.
This is a bit off the track, but students coming into Asia, have they had any AI experience there that
No.
would help them to have a compulsory course in New Europe?
No, in fact, the education in CEGEPs in computer science is, in my experience, terrible. So I think there really needs to be a rethinking of what we teach in computer science on the level of high schools and in CEGEPs. And probably Elizabeth has a lot more to say to this than I have. Also Julia, who's right now teaching at Dawson also.
Why is it terrible?
Because it often still does not tackle some of the core ideas we have in computer science. So, it doesn't talk much about what is an algorithm, what is an effective algorithm, design effective solutions. It still focuses often on designing a web page, for example. Okay, which has not much to do with what computer science is actually about. It's sort of like if you have a biology course where you learn gardening, and then you come to university and have to study biology. Okay, so to give you sort of an analogy. Okay, and so of course you don't teach people gardening in high school when you talk about biology, right? You teach them about how photosynthesis, for example, works, right? And so I think we need to work towards that, and the UK has actually changed a lot of their educational material in schools, and I think Canada is somewhat lagging behind in that regard.
More questions? Yep, we'll be back.
So on that note, are there stats on the ratio between out of province and out of country versus AJAP students in the female representation in computer science?
No, I don't have any stats on that actually. I mean, the others, we also, you notice I talked mostly about women, and that's also, because McGill doesn't keep any stats on other diversity groups. So this is in general a problem. I think we need to have different statistics. We need to get access to data in order to actually understand the problem and how it develops. There are many other questions we'd like to investigate. I mean, this is just what we ask students, right, when they transferred in and out. I mean, of course, more reliable data would be to get actually the data from McGill, which is very, very difficult, okay, as you can imagine. So I think this is something which needs to change within McGill.
And not just at McGill, so you were mentioning stats from the Talby survey, which is an annual survey of who is in computer science. This is done in American schools and some Canadian schools. And they keep track of gender and race, but that's about it for demographic information. So even though we have some evidence that students with disabilities are severely underrepresented in computer science, we don't have any good stats on that. We have no stats on demographics in terms of sexual orientation or gender identity. We don't have any stats on socioeconomic background. There is a lot of ground that still needs to be covered in this area.
Yes.
There was a question further at the back.
Yeah, could you elaborate a bit more about 1984? What was it? I mean, other than a nice book.
I think one of the big events that did happen in 1984 or around that time was the event that basically a personal computer was very affordable, entered family homes. And there are certainly many stats which show that these computers were bought for the boys. Okay. And so it became, to some extent, very much identified with a particular geek culture. It wasn't necessary that the girls were exposed to that kind of technology. And so, and maybe actually Elizabeth can say a lot more.
On my PhD thesis. So it's not just that the PC changed the idea of what who should be computing, because yes, the early PCs were explicitly put as a boys' toy in the school, or not in the schools, in the toy stores. But there were suddenly too many students to be in the fledgling computer science programs. So computer science in the 80s was very young as a discipline. They didn't have many faculty, and then suddenly there's this many students who want to get in. So they had to gatekeep, because they have this many students and this much space for them. And the way that they did the gatekeeping screwed over women, is the short story. And the same thing happened again in the dot-com era when computer science got very popular again. Again, the way the gatekeeping was done disproportionately affected women.
Yeah, and I think, yes, and I think many departments will say, we should not cap our courses, right? I mean, we have a department, we have 30 professors at the moment in our department. I'm very happy that we have 23% women as faculty members. But we are teaching, this is the same number of faculty members as we had back in 2007. Okay. But we are teaching, more than 7 times the number of students. Okay. So if we don't want to put a cap on it. Okay. But then something needs to change on the university level.
And as your stats were showing, the enrollment has been increasing in computer science in recent years, and the percentage of women is going back down again. So I just came from Toronto where I did my PhD, and they are required by the Faculty of Arts and Science to give priority access to students who in high school decide that they want to study computer science. This group of applicants is like 90-something% boys. Okay. And then when women take first-year computer science and want to transfer in, they have a harder time than their male peers who realized earlier on in their lives this was something they wanted to do. And then we have a question at the back who's been waiting patiently.
Great talk. So you showed that you clearly identified the gender and diversity gap being a problem, and you had some strategies to try to fix this problem at McGill. And so have you heard of or noticed other universities across North America trying to also use similar strategies or other strategies to tackle this problem?
Right, so I think there are sort of 2 schools of thought, let's say. Okay, so one is sort of driven by Carnegie Mellon, where their increase in enrollment came from a very good strategy on 2 levels. One was basically that they changed the admission criteria. Okay, so that was completely unintended by the dean back then, but the dean went essentially to the admissions office and said, I want more leaders in computer science. Okay, and then the admissions officers were thinking, what does this mean? He wants more leaders in computer science. Okay, so then they decided that what it meant for them was that they wanted to give more points essentially to students who applied and had shown leadership abilities prior to applying to computer science. And they devalued, in some sense, somebody who had already prior programming experience, extensive programming experience. Okay. And what that, in effect, already did was, of course, it prioritized the women students, okay, because many of the women were actually very active leaders back in their high schools. While, if you were, let's say, a male geek who was an amazing programmer, but you didn't have an impact outside, you wouldn't get in. And so it was a surprise to them that they ended up with 40% women after a couple of years. Okay, it wasn't intended. But they also did not change their program. Okay, it was the same program as they had before, so it's as demanding as ever. Okay, and they did introduce some more entry courses, but it's essentially the same program as before. Now, Harvey Mudd did have a sort of different take on this. So Maria Klawe, who came from UBC, went to Harvey Mudd, and there it was really kind of, in some sense, diversifying what computer science courses would be offered and how computer science would be offered. So she also introduced this idea of sending students to, for example, to Grace Hopper to give them more confidence and give them, sort of expose them to a broader range of what computer science actually is. Okay. But some people would say, it sort of changed a little bit what the computer science courses were about. Okay. So essentially, this is what the discussion sometimes is about, that should one make the courses more interdisciplinary, right, to appeal to people, to biologists, chemists, in all kinds of areas, to sort of showcase sort of computer science has a broad impact, and maybe thereby not focus as much maybe on the technical substance. Or should one just focus on the technical substance and run with it? Okay, McGill, I guess, has in some sense had somewhat a compromise. Like, we didn't change anything in our computer science programs per se, but you can have various kinds of double majors, right, which allow you to combine these different kinds of interests together. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
More questions?
Yep. Do you have any hypotheses as to why the percentage of women in the honors computer science program is so much lower than the honors math?
I do. So the honors program is a funny thing at McGill, okay, because you have to declare yourself that you want to be in the honors program, and you have to do this early, okay, because in computer science, essentially, you have, where the split happens is in a course called 251, which is data structures and algorithms, which is typically a course you take in your first year, maybe in your second year, but usually in your first year. Okay. So during your first year, you have to have the confidence of saying, I'm going to be in honors. Okay. And I would say, since a lot of women transfer into our program, right, they didn't start out as majors in computer science, they don't know that they would manage. And so I think with math, computer science is slightly different, because my guess is they actually come from math, okay, and then decide to combine it with computer science. But if you are just coming towards computer science per se, then a lot of them don't have the confidence that they would manage. And so one of the things we have been discussing is to allow students who do very well in 251 to let it count as 252, which is the honors version of that program. Okay. But that's somewhat an administrative task one would need to do, and one would need to outreach more to the students in these classes. And that is certainly something we plan on doing, to increase also the participation. In some sense, it's not as important as in other disciplines that you were in the honors program if you want to pursue a doctoral degree or a graduate degree, because there are many ways to get research experience. So the Faculty of Science has these 396 projects where you can get involved, and you can still do an undergraduate research experience which is funded through NSERC, for example, or SURA, which is an award program from the faculty. So it's not as important that you do an honors thesis, which is sort of one of the distinguishing factors for the honors program. But you can still get your research experience, and you can get the letters of recommendations to then apply for graduate school.
Question at the back. You have a lot of data about the joint majors programs, but do you have any data on the joint physics and computer science?
There are not many people in the physics and computer science program. I think they are not a handful, so I didn't include them on the slide because they're really too low, the numbers. Right? So there are some programs we have I didn't include in this graph because the numbers are very low. So statistically not really meaningful, right? You get high fluctuations of like the percentages of women in these programs because, you know, you get one more woman and you suddenly have 50% women in the program.
Any more questions? Yep.
The CEGEP programs, I agree it's not fundamentals of computer science, but in these programs, what is the gender distribution? Do you have any idea?
I have no idea.
Julia, do you want to speak to that?
I don't have data. It's just like what I see, which I don't think it's very. It can speak a lot about all CEGEPs, and also the program, the computer science program at Dawson is not. It's a professional program, so yes, it's not. I think the student population is very different. In my classes, I have very different women, but it can be due to different factors. So
All right, we have time for 2 more questions.
I was wondering what's happening at the graduate level, because I think a lot of them mostly for undergrads. We thought like in different talks previously that even if there is a lot of women involved in the undergrad programs, it just drops from the grad programs.
Right. So actually, so in North America, the funny thing that happens is actually on the master's level, there is a higher number of women in the master's program. Okay. And part of the reason is though that there's a very high influx of international students in master's programs. Okay. So it's not the American students. Okay. On the undergraduate level, you don't have such a high percentage of international students. Okay. Now, at McGill, okay, it's abysmal. Okay, I have to just own it up. I think we are below the North American average for the master's program, which is, I think, at McGill, I think around 17%. And for the PhD, we are at 11%. Okay. That is very bad. North America-wide is also quite bad, but it's not, we are worse.
It's not that bad compared to like other programs. I mean, it's bad, I agree.
Yeah.
Like, compared to other programs.
Yes, it compares to other programs. Yeah.
Worse for you guys, I think.
Yeah. But I think people have been trying to narrow this gender gap on the undergraduate level. There hasn't been a lot of focus on that. But even departments who had a high percentage, like Carnegie Mellon, had between 35 and 45% women studying in computer science for almost a decade, more than a decade. You don't see the same rate from these schools going into graduate programs. Okay, so there's definitely some gap. Okay, and I think the same happens at McGill. We see not the same rate of women going into the master's program, for example, at McGill.
So to add some context for why the international students increase the diversity at the master's level, the percentage of women in computer science varies a great deal country to country. So in Iran, for example, women are 44% of CS majors. In Malaysia, it's 65%. Qatar, 80%.
Wow.
And it varies immensely. 35% in Brazil. I don't have all of the numbers memorized for every single country, but the developing world is actually doing much better on average than the developed world in this regard.
Yes. And just to add one more point, okay, the decline of women in computer science in North America, actually in Germany, which is very interesting. When I studied computer science in Germany, we were officially at 11% women in computer science, which was much lower than what happened in North America at that time. Okay. However, at the moment, okay, in Germany, it's actually over 20%. Okay. So it's been rising. While in North America, it has steadily declined. Okay, so I think this goes that it's really a phenomenon of in countries and what kind of action maybe has been taken to encourage a diverse group to enter computer science and promote computer science as part of STEM, for example.
And I think we have one last question over there.
The students that go straight into computer science, right? They did not branch in from. Do you have a portrait of what drove them in doing a good job at teaching kids the fundamentals of computer science. So it must come from elsewhere. So we have a portrait of like where this interest comes from and how does that reflect into the gender gap of students coming in as a UCU.
So I think this tells you a pretty good story, actually. I mean, I think, it is, job aspect is a very important aspect, I think, okay? Earning money, okay? I think that is a very important aspect. And I think it's an important aspect for men as well as for women, okay? So it has been a lot in the news, there are a lot of jobs, okay? And I think that is a big incentive for
More
students.
that than I know my parents send both a computer with me and play with them more.
Right, but I started computer science and I didn't know anything about computers. Okay, I mean, at Grand U, I did computer science because my brother did computer science and he talked me into it. Okay, but I never programmed before I started computer science. Okay, so my first programming course was at the university. I liked math, I liked physics. Okay, and I thought computer science would be good because I could earn quite a lot of money and it would be more applied than math, basically, right? So, and I think that is reflected here, right? That at some point here, people, men and women, right, realize, okay, they're good at it. But I think the course, right, being exposed to what it is, I mean, be it at home, right? For you, maybe it was at home because you assembled something with your dad. Or like for me, it was in some sense maybe because my brother talked me into it. But I think being exposed to what computer science has to offer does play an important aspect with it, right? And it's not just what we read in the news, right? We don't think when we use programs, right, being online banking or whatever, you're not thinking that this is a program I could write, okay? And so I think a course does matter, okay? Now we also had at some point a summer camp which we offered for students to attend. But and that is also an experience that not only at McGill, I think many universities who offered summer camps, they didn't see necessarily the direct effect of students then coming into the computer science programs. It wasn't quite enough, okay? And I think, but I do think offering a course like 202, which is really like, it doesn't have any prereqs, but it can count towards your science prerequisites. So I would be totally in favor if it is made a required course, because I think it does matter and it gives everybody a better understanding. And it's nowadays, right, biologists, chemists, physicists, you can be in anthropology, you can be in sociology, you can be in psychology. I mean, you can really Google computational X, anything, right? And you can put in your favorite X and you will get computational X, okay? So I think it is such an important field these days that I think some basic understanding of it is in some sense necessary. And I think today, even if you go, one thing which really drives me nuts, but it really goes to the point that computer science isn't recognized as an own discipline. If you go to a bookstore, okay, that's a bit old-fashioned, but never mind. You go to a bookstore at a university and you go to the physics section, okay? You find great physics books there. You go to the math section, you find great math books, okay? You go to the philosophy section, you find great philosophy books. Go to the computer science section. What do you find? You find books about how to design your web page. That is not computer science. This is not a book which should even be in that section. Okay? But I think that is sort of the common understanding, right? It's like about graphics, right? Doing some kind of graphics thing, using Word, doing Excel, doing some kind of calculations. And I think we need to move beyond that. Okay. And I think if we do, then more people are actually interested in what happens.
Yes. Well, thank you very much for a wonderful talk.
Thank you.
And it's my turn to then thank all our volunteers, our support staff, and to encourage you to come next Wednesday. We'll leave the world of CS and we're delving into the world of sustainability sciences. Elena Bennett from the MAC campus, she will give a presentation. The title is The Role of Women in Sustainability Sciences. Her moderator is Alison Gonzalez, who is from the Faculty of Education. Hope to see you back here, 6 o'clock or 6:30 for the lecture next week, April 11th. Safe home, everyone.